Hi everyone, I'm back again for the November 2016 Power BI desktop update. I'm very excited to show you some of the great features we have coming for this release, including some more connectors, a new slicer, even more analytics features, and many other exciting features. So let's get started. The first feature I want to talk about is our new hierarchical axis. So this is a new way to view your axis whenever you're drilling down into a visual that has a hierarchy. So let me show you that. So I'm going to quickly create a column chart with on the axis category and subcategory. And add sales amount into the values bucket. So by default, whenever I expand into the next level of the hierarchy, I get both levels of the hierarchy concatenated together. But you can see this can create quite long labels, and depending on the size of your visual, you can also get a lot of truncation. So we've added a new way to format your axis, which you can find under the formatting pane. And under the x-axis, you'll see this option called concatenate labels, which is what we do by default. And whenever you turn that off, we use our new hierarchical axis. And you can see the first level of the hierarchy, the category label, is shown on the bottom here. And then above that, you'll see the next level of the hierarchy, which was the subcategory in this case. And this is a great way to view your labels whenever you have this kind of hierarchy on your chart. The next feature I want to talk about is some improvements we've made to our axis labels and title formatting. So for a while now, we've had the ability to color your axis labels and title together, a specific color. This was applied to most charts, but not all. With this release, we're extending that to any chart that happens to have an axis. Additionally, you're now also able to color your title and axis separately. So going back to this same chart, if, for example, I wanted to show the title for this x-axis, I can then, by default, the color will match the color of the labels, but I can go in there and I can change the color to something, say, like our green. And then just the title is colored green. So this gives me even more control over exactly how I want my axis formatting to look. The next feature is one that's been highly requested. We've had for a little while now conditional formatting for measures on tables. With this release, we're extending that to also work with matrices. So I'm going to go in, and first I'll make this visual smaller. And then I'm going to create a matrix that has categories and subcategories on it again. And this time I'm going to add our net satisfaction, and I'm going to show the average of that. And now I can see the average net satisfaction for each of the categories. And now, similar to how whenever I want to do this on a table, I can go into the values bucket and I can pick conditional formatting. And from here, it works just like the table conditional formatting did. I can choose to add a third color. I can pick to change the color to any custom color or one from our default palette. So I can make it red, yellow, green, and then I can hit OK. And the conditional formatting is applied. And so this makes it really easy to see, for example, that our worst offender in terms of net satisfaction was projectors and screens, and our home theater systems have a really high satisfaction. We've made another improvement to our matrix and table visuals. You now have the ability to specify a formatting for any given column. So let's take this average net satisfaction column again, and under the formatting pane, you'll see a new option here called column formatting, and you'll see this one for tables as well as matrix. And when you can open it, you can see all of your columns will be shown here. In my case, I only have one, but if I had multiple columns, I could see all of them. And I can select whichever one I want to format, and then I can pick what I want the font or background color to be. So I, for example, want, instead of having the default black font, I want my font color to be white, so I can go in here and I can specify that directly. I can also choose what parts of the column I want to be formatted. So you can see I can choose to just format the header, the values, the subtotals, or the totals. In my case, by default, it formats the values and the subtotals, but in my case, since the subtotals are not conditionally formatted, I actually want those to stay the default black. So I'll just go ahead and turn that off for subtotals. And now it's really easy to read my labels in both the values and the subtotals. And so this just gives you even more fine-grained control over your tables and matrix. So with this feature, you can really make your tables look however you want them to look. Next on our list is the drop-down slicer. This was a very huge ask within our community. Slicers are great and people love using them, but they can sometimes take up a little bit too much room on the canvas. So with this addition of the drop-down slicer, you'll be able to have the power of the slicer without having a whole section of your canvas devoted to it. So to use the drop-down slicer, you create just a normal slicer like you always would, and you can pick what you want to go in there. For example, I want the manufacturer to go in here, and by default you'll still get the list view, but you can go in here and pick that you want to see the drop-down slicer instead. And now you can resize that nice and small and pick exactly how wide you want the box to be. And then it works just the same as the list slicer, but instead of having all of them show at once, you just have a drop down to pick between. And then of course you can choose to filter, and all the same settings, like being able to choose if you want it to be by default multi-select or single select, or if you want to select all option, all of those still apply in here. The last report view feature I'm going to talk about this time is the mobile report scrolling. So we have a preview for mobile reports that's out there for anyone to use to be able to design how they want the vertical layout of their report to look whenever a person's viewing it on a mobile device. Previously, you had just the only space you had available was just what you could fit directly on the screen without any scrolling. We've now made an update to that so that now you can make it much longer and have the user scroll to see the rest. So let me show you that. It's accessed the same way behind the View tab. You can change to the mobile report layout, and then you can go in here and you can just continue to drag and drop. So I'll drop in my drop-down slicer first to go on the top, and then I'll put in my column chart. And this I want to be very big because there's a lot of labels here. So I actually want it to extend below what would normally show up on the screen. And you can see the scroll bars there for your user to be able to scroll down and see more. And then of course I can also drop in my matrix here and have that show up. And so with this feature, there's a lot, you can fit a whole lot more visuals on your screen. And so you no longer have to make tough choices about what visuals you want to show up on the vertical view versus the horizontal view, which is the whole report. So I can go back. And that's all the reporting features we have for this release. And so now moving on into the analytics features, our first feature we have is called clustering. With our new clustering preview, you'll be able to really quickly and easily find different groups of data points within your data. So let me show you this powerful analytics feature in action. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to add a scatter chart to start with. And on the scatter chart, I'm going to add, for the x-axis, the average of my net satisfaction. And on the y-axis, I'm going to add my likelihood to purchase again. And then I'm going to show all of my products on here by putting the product ID in the details. And there's a whole lot of products here, so it's kind of hard to see if there's any kind of natural groupings within this chart. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to click the ... for more options, and I'm going to click the button that says automatically find clusters. This will produce a dialog where I can do a couple of minor things, such as change the name of the field that's going to be created, change the description, and most importantly, I can control the number of clusters created. So I can either choose to leave it the default auto, or I can choose to give it a specific value. So for example, I am looking for somewhere around like 5 clusters. So I can hit in 5 and I can hit OK. And what we do is we automatically run the clustering algorithm on your data, and we'll create a field for you, which you can find in the field list that has all the cluster categories. And by default, we'll also add that to the legend of your scatter. And just like any field, you can use it for cross-highlighting or in any other charts to do your analysis. And so with this feature, I was able to quickly see any kind of groupings that are in my data and do analysis with them. Now with my scatter chart here, I could only do clustering on 2 measures. But if I wanted to do clustering with more measures, I could actually do the same kind of approach with a table. So let's select this matrix, and I'm going to change it over to a table. And I'm going to add in a couple of other measures, such as likelihood to purchase again, sales amount, and units. I'm also going to remove categories, so I'm only clustering on 1 categorical value. And then I'm just going to make the other charts just a little bit smaller to give this table a little bit more room. And now with this table selected, I can go to the same ... and I again can choose to automatically find clusters. And a similar thing, I can either choose to leave it auto or give any number of clusters that I wanted to find, and I can hit OK. And just like for the scatter chart, it creates a field with all those clusters and automatically adds it to that chart. So I can see here it actually found by default 4 clusters within all of my categories. And if you ever need to change any of those settings, you can of course go over to the field that we created, and under the ... you can choose to edit clusters, and you'll see all the different clusters we had the first time we ran the algorithm created and the number of items in each. And then you can also go in and edit the number of clusters, and we'll rerun it on your data. So this is just a great feature for you to do any kind of additional analytics on different groupings of any given field in your data set. Next up in our analytics section is forecasting. So we've had forecasting available for a little while as a preview feature, but it was only in the desktop. We've now made it also available in Power BI on the web. So now whenever you're looking at your reports in the web, maybe editing them, you can go into the same analytics pane that you have in the desktop and choose to add a forecast to your line chart. And whenever you pin your whatever chart you have with the forecasting, that forecasting will also show up on your tiles. So you can now have a full end-to-end experience with forecasting. The last feature is groups. We've added a new entry point for groups in the ribbon, so let me show you where that is. Whenever you have a category selected in a chart and you go into the Data and Drill tab, you can see there's now a Groups button in the ribbon as well. So this just adds another type of entry point for doing the grouping experience. And so it just makes it a little bit easier to find whenever you are analyzing your data, creating your charts, and wanting to create groups. Moving on to the data connector section, the first topic I want to talk about is Direct Query for Spark. With this release, we've extended our Spark data connectors to work with Direct Query. So when you're in a report, and actually it needs to be a blank report, since Direct Query, whenever you use Direct Query, it can be the only data source in your file. Whenever you go to enter to get data, if you use any of our Spark connectors, such as the Azure HD Insight Spark or the Import Data from Spark option, you'll see that you have the ability, once you've accepted the preview dialog, you have the ability to choose Direct Query as your import method. And then you can use the Direct Query option for Spark just like any of our other Direct Query options that we have in the desktop. The next bullet point here is for OData connectors. We've added the ability for folding of expand record operators into the OData feed itself. So to improve your performance of complicated data models that you're accessing through the OData feed, we've added the support for the underlying OData service to do the expand records operation before you pull it into Power BI. This is more efficient because there's going to be less data being passed into Power BI by doing this. The next bullet point here is enhancements to the combined binaries experience. So there's a couple of things that you get in this enhancement. The first being that we will detect the right file format to use, so text, Excel, JSON, etc. You'll also be able to select an object for the first file to use. And when you go through the flow, you'll actually create 3 artifacts for you now. The first being an example query of all the required extraction steps. The second is a function query that parameterizes the file input to the exemplar query. And the last thing is we will apply the function query to the original query with input binaries so that it applies the function query for binary inputs on each row and then expands the resulting data extraction as top-level columns. So with all of this, it just makes it really easy for you to combine all of your binaries within a folder and use that data in Power BI. So you should, if you want to use this kind of experience to pull in data from files, you should be able to, the whole process should be a whole lot easier now with all these updates that we've done. The last bullet point under the data connectors is a new connector. You've probably seen the announcements. There are now the ability to use analysis services on top of Azure, and we now allow you to connect to those Azure analysis services instances in Power BI. So whenever you are getting data, you can use the same analysis services option that you would for SQL Server, but within the server option here, instead of using your SQL Server Analysis Services server link, you would actually use the link that you can get from the Azure Analysis Services. And you put that in here, and you'll pick Connect Live, and you'll be able to, just like connecting to Analysis Services SQL Server, you'll be able to connect to Azure Analysis Services and use that data in Power BI. The last section is around query editing improvements. So the first improvement here is around an improvement for the function authoring experience. We're making it a whole lot easier to update function definitions without the need to maintain the underlying M code. So when a function definition has been created based on another query, a link will be created between the original query and the newly generated function. This means that you can simply modify the original query steps and the linked function will be automatically updated for them. The next bullet point here is support for percentage data types. So now whenever you pull in your data from your data source, we'll be able to detect if the type is a percentage. Additionally, whenever you have a column selected, you can choose to force percentage as the data type as well. And you'll see the little indicator here saying that it's percentage type, and you can of course use this like a percentage throughout any calculations that you're doing in your query editor. So the last bullet point here is that we've added the maximize and restore buttons to the navigator and query dependencies dialog. So now whenever you are, for example, in the query dependencies dialog, you'll see the ability to increase the size of this to fit your whole window, and of course go back, just like many other dialogs in Windows. And so this just makes it a lot easier if you're doing something like looking at your queries and you need a bigger view of them to be able to do that. And with that, that's the whole list of the updates that we're doing for the Power BI Desktop's November release. Please try out all these great features and give us your feedback either in the blog comments or at community.powerbi.com. We'll be sure to look out for your feedback and, of course, always respond to that. Thank you very much.